Okay, good morning. Now, 2 weeks ago in our class, we started discussing cittas, and I mentioned that I wanted to take a slightly different approach from that I had been doing for the past, I don't know, 25 years. And that is, rather than discussing citta number one, as defined in the Abhidhamma Sangaha, I want to go through the list of cittas according to how they arise in the sense door process and the mind door process. So we started with the life continuum cittas. We continued with the five sense door adverting citta, then with the sense consciousness citta, all the different sense consciousness cittas for the five senses, then receiving and investigating cittas. Those are the ones that we covered, and they're fairly basic, sorry, not fairly basic, they're very basic cittas. Not a lot of details, but I wanted to introduce new information that had not been discussed previously regarding those cittas. And near the end of the class, I was asked a question about habits, how habits might influence the the five sense door adverting citta. And that is an excellent topic. And that's what I'm going to be expanding upon today. Now, the technical term, and I answered, I kind of waffled a bit. I said, yeah, they kind of influence, but not really, but kind of. So now I want to expand that in much more detail. All right, so the Pali term for habits is natural decisive support condition, pakatopisinaya, and I'm showing here two boxes with an arrow connecting them. The first box is the conditioning states. The arrow connecting them is the condition, and the box receiving the conditioning, the force or the energy from the conditioning are the conditioned states. This is the standard Abhidhamma way of describing conditioning. All the different conditions are described as having a set of conditioning states, which are usually dhammas, though as we will see here, for natural decisive support condition, certain concepts can also apply. And then conditioned states are more dhammas. And the force that connects the two is the conditioning force or the conditioning state, in this case, natural decisive support condition. So let's go into the definition according to the Abhidhamma of what are the conditioning states and the conditioned states. The conditioning states are strong past, 89 cittas, 52 cettasikas, 28 rupas, and some concepts. And the conditioned states are 89 cittas and 52 cettasikas. So let's go into a little bit more detail, some examples of how that operates, some practical examples. When a person gets angry easily, even with minimal provocation, that is natural decisive support condition working. Well-cultivated sila leads to wholesome karma creating cittas. In other words, people who practice their precepts or really take their precepts seriously, that naturally leads to wholesome karma creating cittas like generosity or loving kindness. Frequently practiced dana inclines the mind towards spontaneous giving. Deeply rooted concern for status on the negative side supports the arising of conceit, comparison with others. Repeated identification with the self, everything centering around I, me, mine, that strengthens the personality belief or Sakaya Ditti. Other examples, the path citta, even from a past existence, supports absence of certain defilements. So, for example, if a person achieves the Sotapanna path, becomes the first degree of sainthood, that path citta blocks, if you will, any wrong views from arising or certain defilements from arising in any future mental stream. So even though may have become a Sotapanna 3 lifetimes ago, it still blocks in this lifetime any arising of those defilements. And the defilements that are blocked will be increased as the degree of sainthood increases. Persistent noting practice allows for rapid reestablishment of sati, or mindfulness, after distraction. In other words, when you've been practicing a lot of vipassana and that becomes the habit of the mind, then mindfulness quickly comes back after distraction. Traumatic experiences incline the mind toward fear of certain similar objects. Maybe in a past life, I died by drowning, and this would cause a fear of water in this life. Faith in the triple gem causes wholesome cittas to arise when hearing the Dhamma. I personally have experienced this. When I first heard the Dhamma, naturally I was inclined towards it, even though I had never met a Buddhist. But when I started reading about it, I was just naturally interested in it. And I believe it's because I had faith in the triple gem from a previous existence. And so in this existence, when it exposed itself, it caused immediate wholesome cittas. Prior development of insight knowledges make future insight knowledges easier. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that, how natural decisive support condition works during Vipassana, some of the specifics. But basically, once you start practicing, it builds because of past experience. Even if you haven't meditated for an hour, a week, a month, or a year, that platform is still there. And the reason that that platform still being there influences the current state of mind is because of natural decisive support condition. So you can call it a habit, but it's actually broader than that. Let's first do a deep dive into the what are the conditioned states. So every current citta, 89 cittas and 52 cettasikas, that means that's the complete list. That is, every single citta with every single cettasika will be influenced by natural decisive support conditioning. Sometimes it's just almost a negligible influence. Sometimes it's a significant influence. But every single citta, every current citta, to some degree, will be influenced by natural decisive support conditioning. And so I've listed here all the different types of cittas, like continuum, adverting, sense, consciousness, receiving, and investigating. We've already discussed. In this talk, we'll go through determining, and I don't know if we're going to get to karma creating or not, but then we'll go through the rest of those cittas a little later. So everything is influenced, every current state of mind is influenced by natural decisive support conditioning. Now, of all of the conditions, actually, they start out with 24 and they go into subconditions to more than 40. All of those conditions, there's only 2 that happen over time. All the other conditions, the conditioning states and the conditioned states, arise at the same time. So, for example, object conditioning, aramana pachaya. The object and the mind that experiences the object arise at the same time, so they're simultaneous. But with natural decisive support condition, you've got past cittas, cettasikas, rūpa, and concepts influencing later or current cittas with all of their cettasikas. That's one. The second one, of course, is karma, where past karma influences current current karma resultant or current vipaka cittas. And we'll talk about that. We'll do a similar diagram later for how karma influences, causes the current state to be influenced. So these are the conditioned states. Now let's do kind of a deep dive on the strong past. All right, I've talked about past. Strong because of repetition, emotional investment, meaning it was done with a big heart, long duration of cultivation. You practiced it time and time again, or past karmic force. So what I mean by past karmic force is like when a wholesome or unwholesome mental pattern, you get a habit of generosity or aversion, been repeatedly created by karma in the past lives or earlier in this life, it becomes a powerful natural support for similar states now. So, for example, a yogi who has developed mindfulness and insight, find mindfulness arises easily and insight arises easily. So this is the karmic force. It's kind of like this. This is how I visualize it. The first time that you go on retreat, it's like you're standing in front of a field of tall grass. You don't see any way forward. That's the first image, the first panel. The second image, the second panel is there's the beginning of a path. That means you've sat down, you've tried to practice, probably failed, not probably, definitely failed. You tried and failed. You've taken steps through all that long grass, and there's the beginnings of a path that you have created. The third panel is after some time, the path is well worn, well tread, and well right out in front of you. Don't have to push aside the grass. You just go right through. This is because of repetition, long duration of cultivation, emotional investment, and past karmic force that the path clears in front of you. So, as I mentioned, past includes earlier in this life and from previous lives. If it's really recent, it has a stronger influence. If it can have a stronger influence. If it's further back, it may have less strong influence, depending on other factors such as the strength, the emotional commitment to it, the repetition, and so on. 89 cittas and 52 cettasikas as conditioning states. That includes all cittas. So all cittas that have existed since the mind has existed through countless lifetimes are included, but the karma creating cittas are more active, and therefore they condition stronger. They have a bigger impact. Not that the other ones can have zero impact, but it's pretty minimal. The impact is pretty minimal as compared to the karma creating cittas. 28 rūpa here includes all the external and material conditions such as the climate, the dwelling, where you stay, what kind of food, all those kinds of things. So it's important that you read and understand the commentary. If you just look at the Abhidhamma and it says strong past, cittas, cettasikas, all rūpas, you go, well, what does that really mean in real life? Here it gives examples of things like climate, dwelling, food, and so on. The Abhidhamma defines some concepts as persons and entities, social and relational concepts, doctrinal and philosophical concepts, and conceptual images of desirable or undesirable things. What does that mean? Well, personal or entities, for example, myself, my teacher, my enemy, a saint, a criminal, my wife. So for example, a person who I have known previously, even if in a previous life, can be, even though a person is a concept, that person acts as a conditioning factor for later cittas. So you meet up with a monk in this life because of past experiences with monks. You have that a natural reaction, or even past experiences in previous lives with monks, it naturally causes a certain reaction. You see a statue of the Buddha, a Buddha rūpa, it can have a natural reaction, even though you've never seen one before, a natural calming reaction because of perhaps exposure in a previous life. Social, relational concepts, things like family, nation, what country you belong to, what community you're part of, your reputation, your status. So things like those conditions can condition motivation, attachment, fear, pride, generosity. Doctrinal and philosophical concepts, so your views about yourself, your moral beliefs, your religious teachings, philosophical, they can support right view or wrong view. So, for example, you got a correct understanding of karma, that supports wholesome conduct, while belief in a permanent self, that can support clinging. So, your underlying views influence the kind of present status of cittas that arise. Conceptual images of desirable or undesirable things like wealth or success or sensual pleasures, dangers or threat. Now, even if object isn't present, the idea of wealth, one can be attracted to it. So those things can cause craving or fear, as example. Now, there's one more that was listed in the Abhidhamma, and that is meditative concepts, like in samatha practice, kasina objects. An example, I remember Bhante Sujiva talking about how when he was practicing, he was learning how to practice samatha meditation. And his teacher, Bhante Sayadaw U Pandita, said, "What color do you like for your kasina?" And Bhante Sujiva, as a student, said, "I like yellow. Yellow is a sunny color." So he said, "I'll try yellow." But he found that yellow didn't work for him. Then Sayadaw U Pandita said, "Why don't you try red?" But the Sujiva said, "Oh, no, I don't like red." But the Sayadaw U Pandita said, "Try red." So he did, and it worked very well for him. So he found that that worked very well, probably because of conditioning in previous lives. He had worked with that kind of kasina or that kind of samatha meditation object in the past. So those are examples of concepts that are included in the conditioning state. Things that you can do, making a vow or a resolution, like we make a determination. I'm going to sit down. I'm not going to move for the next half an hour. That kind of vow, that strong-willed vow or a resolution can influence the mind later. Weighty, wholesome or unwholesome karma, when you do with a lot of intention, and we'll talk about weighty karma later, a lot of intention with a lot of action effort, a lot of effort, that creates strong karma. Strong support for natural decisive support. Frequently repeated moral actions, things like generosity, dana, bowing down in front of the Buddha, powerful jhanic attainments. So if one attains jhana, that can impact the ability to enter jhana state before. Near-death experiences, I mentioned earlier the example of if you've in a previous life drowned, or maybe in this life you almost drowned. So that could create a fear of water in this life. Severe illness can be a conditioning state. Bereavement, I mean, you've lost a loved one. Sudden loss or gain, that kind of thing can be a state. Hearing authentic Dhamma and meeting a noble disciple. The texts really stress how important that is, having a teacher who preaches the true Dhamma as a very strong supporting condition through natural decisive support for spiritual development. Powerful devotional experience through meditation, it can be very impactful. Breakthrough moments in meditation. On the negative side, abuse, violence, public humiliation, deep betrayal, all these things can influence how the mind works after. So it's much broader than just habits. Tendency towards confidence, towards investigation, attachment, aversion, confusion, or speculation. Here, the texts talk about the citta. And I've mentioned about citta earlier. Those are the categories that meditation teachers use to classify their students based on these 6 areas, so that once a student has been classified, the teacher knows, oh, well, this kind of student, based on their character, their citta, the most appropriate form of meditation is this. This is the right type of environment. This is how they like to meditate. So he knows how to make things easier for that particular student. Regular dana, consistent sila, mindfulness in daily life, habitual dishonesty or harsh speech, those habits also act as conditioning states. Frequent metta practice, repeated contemplation of anicca, reflecting on impermanence. I'm both impermanence as an impermanence of a concept, like things dissolve naturally, or objects, meditation objects. Wise reflection, worry, rumination, fantasies, habitual, all these habits act as support through natural support condition for the mind now. Recent praise, success, criticism, conflict, listening to inspiring, disturbing content, doom scrolling, going through your phone, looking at all the news and getting concerned about the latest trends or the latest war. Repeated exposure to stimulating media, always watching YouTube. Immersion in quiet, natural surroundings on the positive side, supportive community engagement, being with friends and community, that can be a good conditioning state. Living in a quiet monastery, residing in a residing in a chaotic urban environment, climate, season, economic stability, whether you're okay with money right now or not. A morning walk in the fresh air. I just added this a couple of minutes ago, just before starting this, because this morning my wife and I went out for a beautiful morning walk by the beach. Beautiful fresh air. We sat down and we were both in a very good mood. So there was conditioning from that recent walk to the current state of mind being very positive and happy. So I just added that in. But I think you get the idea here. Health and vitality, chronic pain, hormonal fluctuations, sleep deprivation, all these are examples of conditioning states. Now, this one is specifically for meditators. The prior development of nama rupa paricheda jnana, that's the first insight knowledge. That is the clear understanding of the distinction between mental and material processes. Once that is experienced, you can read about it and be taught about it and say you understand it conceptually. But once in meditation, that is personally experienced, the first insight knowledge, it has a very deep effect. The accumulated insight into anicca, that inclines the mind to perceive the arising and passing away of the object, no matter what object comes up. Naturally, the mind, once the mind is, if you will, tuned or has a habit of observing the dissolution aspect of that object, the anicca dissolution aspect, the mind naturally flows that way. Now, strengthen Sankara Upekkha Jnana. This is the 11th insight knowledge. It's a fairly developed insight knowledge just before attaining sainthood. And at this point, with Sankara Upekkha Jnana, at this point, the mind is no longer disturbed. It is neutral toward the experience of the constant dissolution of phenomena. And once a person has experienced this, then there's less reaction. You get stable, balanced observation of whatever arises during meditation. Before that, insight is relatively fragile. The yogi may reach stages like Udavaya the knowledge of passing away, rising and passing away, or Bhanga the knowledge of dissolution, but the mind can easily fall back into distraction, conceptualization. But once Sankaropeka has been established, then the mindfulness and concentration, equanimity, insight become really strong. So when you start practicing again, automatically the mind just quickly skims over, almost instantly skims over the first few insights and settles directly into the experience of dissolution. And I know people who almost on their first sitting immediately experience this almost immediate jumping to everything is dissolving. And this is because in a past life, they had experienced Sankaropeka. So naturally, when they restart their sitting, it happens at that stage. Now, ripening of parami. So during meditation, when difficult things happen, when the parami of faith or energy or kanti or practice, endurance, mindfulness, if you've got those habits, then the mind doesn't give up. You don't give up. So the previously accumulated virtues, all those virtues from before, naturally strengthen and cause the mind to continue observing. So to summarize, there's a bunch of internal mind states like mindfulness, building new habits, precepts, meditation. These are the good things that you can do. Now, those require like conscious efforts. Bad habits, such as habitual rumination, just thinking, reactive media consumption, just getting used, just doom scrolling, irregular observation, not keeping your precepts, those are also internal, and they happen more naturally, don't require the same effort as the internal wholesome ones I've listed here. External, keep the body healthy, though that creates a good condition. Association with the wise, the association with holy people or enlightened people, exposure to the Dhamma, come to Abhidhamma class, go on retreat. These are examples of external conditioning states. So again, plugging retreat. An intensive retreat removes many unwholesome conditions simultaneously. So as soon as you go on retreat, you don't have your phone, so there's no media consumption. You're not talking, so there's no conflict, or usually very little conflict. Your sleep becomes more regular because you're on a fixed schedule. You're avoiding a stimulating environment. You're in an environment without a lot of distractions. At the same time, it supports wholesome conditioning, Dhamma reflection, observing sila, practicing constant mindfulness. All of those mean that a retreat is a really good place for natural decisive support condition to positively influence your spiritual development. Okay, so before jumping into how natural decisive support condition influences the cittas that we've already talked about, the life continuum, the five sensory adverting, sensing, consciousness, receiving, and investigating, any questions on what I've covered so far? Okay, so this is a pretty in-depth discussion of habits or natural decisive support condition, which is incredibly important. When we take our precepts, if the direct translation of the words that we are taking is, I undertake the habit of training to avoid killing. All right, panatipata veramani sikapadam smadhyami. So what this means is habits or undertaking a rule of training to have a habit of avoiding killing is when we're taking precepts. So it's that's the practical application of natural decisive support condition. Okay, so now let's go into our list of cittas that we covered last time, which was life continuum, adverting, the 5 sense door adverting, sense consciousness, receiving, and investigating. And I've shown again the flow of cittas in the sense door process and the mind door process. Life continuum. Now, the life continuum citta arises throughout life as the result of the same karma that produced the rebirth linking citta. We already mentioned that before. Right? Right here. The ethical nature, whether it is whether it's 2 roots or 3 roots, and the type of life continuum cittas remain fixed during the entire existence because they're determined by the rebirth producing karma. In other words, the karma that drove us into this life, the resultant of that same karma is the life continuum cittas, and they're exactly the same. They're fixed through this entire existence. It's like a passive background. That stream of life continuum is like a passive background current that flows according to that karma that brought us into this existence. So during the present existence, natural decisive support conditioning cannot reshape the type of life continuing citta or the cittasikas that arise with it. In other words, once it's there, it's there. Natural decisive support conditioning cannot change it in any way. But habits and latent tendencies, including those carried from previous existences, together with mental training developed by Vipassana practice, predisposes how the mind responds when the stream of life continuum is interrupted by a sense door process. So in other words, it doesn't change, like the natural decisive support condition doesn't change the life continuum citta, but the sensitivity of the life continuum citta to be disturbed does get influenced by natural decisive support condition. Natural decisive support conditioning influences the sensitivity of the mental stream to certain kinds of objects. For example, the mind of a musician is more sensitive to sounds than the mind of a non-musician. During Vipassana meditation, the yogi's mind quickly turns to new sense objects. So even though the musician, maybe when they started out, they didn't hear but the notes so clearly, over time, they develop a very sharp hearing. I remember my son, we were traveling in the car, and when he was quite young, he started laughing. I said, "Well, what are you laughing?" He said, "Well, you were listening to jazz, and the saxophone came in half a beat later." I mean, I had no idea what he was that happened, but his ear, because of perhaps conditioning in a past life and some conditioning in this life, was able to pick out the music and what was happening in the music to a much different degree than I was, even though we were both exposed to exactly the same music. So that's life continuum. The functions of adverting, sense consciousness, receiving, and investigating are fixed. They just do a basic, simple thing, set of functions that we discussed last time. Natural decisive support conditioning doesn't shape their character, but it supports the circumstances in which the cittas arise and the readiness of the sense door process to occur when appropriate objects appear. So in other words, it's a kind of an indirect influence that the mind is more sensitive. It doesn't change the function of these cittas, but it can influence the kinds of objects that readily attract attention and initiate a sense door process. It's like I use here like a switchboard operator, the old telephone switchboard operator. The function of plugging it in is identical. However, a very experienced switchboard operator will be much faster at doing the job than a person on their first day of the job. Okay, so a switchboard operator, how they react, how they handle the equipment will be far different than based on how much experience they have. And so similarly, the mental continuum disturbance arises far more quickly when certain objects arise because of experience. Now, if a person has repeatedly reacted with craving or aversion or mindfulness toward a certain type of objects, these habitual tendencies prime or prepare the mind. So if past experience has repeatedly led to strong reaction towards similar objects, natural decisive support conditioning makes the arising of a very great or great sense door process more likely. If there's been little or no prior conditioning, the sense door process may be slight or very slight. In other words, two people may experience the same sense object, but because of their past conditioning, one person takes the same sense object as a very great, meaning it's processed and has subsequent processes, where the second person who has not had the same kind of experience with that object may ignore it. Now, the sense consciousness, receiving and investigating, these cittas are the result of past karma. Cittas that are the result of past karma are called vipaka cittas. So these three, sense consciousness, receiving, investigating, are considered to be vipaka, are defined as vipaka cittas. Going back to our definition of conditioning, remember our natural decisive support condition linked the conditioning states of strong past cittas, cettasikas, rupas, and concepts to later cittas and cettasikas. So let's look at how that same reaction or that same structure is used to describe the other kind of conditioning that operates asynchronously or not at the same time. That's karma conditioning. So the conditioning states for asynchronous karma condition is that volition in past karma creating cittas, that includes the 12 unwholesome, the 8 sense sphere wholesome, the fine material and 4 immaterial jhana, and the 4 or 20 path cittas, the magga cittas. The volition in those cittas operates through natural decisive support, through asynchronous karma condition to influence later resultant cittas, the vipaka cittas, which are the 15 sense sphere rootless, which we've talked about, the 8 sense sphere cittas, which are their primary function is life continuum. There are 5 fine material, 4 immaterial sphere life continuum cittas, and the pala or fruit cittas, the 4 or 20. As well, karma-born matter. All right, so let's look into this in a little bit more detail. The sources of karma, primarily that we're going to be that we'll talk about, are the 12 unwholesome and the 8 wholesome. Okay, we're not going to talk about the jhana cittas or the path cittas right now, but these conditioning states. For these conditioning states, the strength of the karma is influenced by the strength of the volition, including premeditation and deliberateness. So an action that is premeditated, planned, and prepared for, the deliberateness, the intention that goes into it, influence the strength, both on the wholesome and unwholesome. Planned, premeditated murder is more serious than an accidental murder. Premeditated, preparing dana, doing all the planning for it and preparation for it, deliberate offering of dana, that makes that karma, the wholesome karma, more powerful. Next is the effort expended in the act. So, for example, these are quotes from the Abhidhamma, but effort expended in the act. That's why, for example, the karma that is created, all other things being equal, to kill a mosquito is much less than the kama created to kill a elephant. Why? The kama required to kill a mosquito is very small, or the effort required is very simple. You just slap your hand. If you want to kill an elephant with your bare hands, you got to put a lot of work into it. It's a lot more effort. And then moral or spiritual qualities of the victim. Animals, killing an animal is less serious than killing a human. And the personal relationship between the doer and the victim. So, for example, anger directed at a stranger, like somebody cuts you off, you get angry at them. That's the kama is weaker than anger directed at a family member. So that is the things that condition stronger or weaker kama. Let's look at the results of kama, which include the cittas, the vipaka cittas, and kama-born matter. The 15 sense sphere rootless cittas, those are the sensing, sense consciousness, receiving, and investigating that we've already discussed. Kama is sometimes I talk about this cloud of kamic seeds, but that can be a bit misleading, because cloud of kamic seeds doesn't imply that there's a storehouse of kama, that you carry kama around with you. It is a causal potentiality carried within the mental continuum. In other words, there is this energy, kamic energy or kamic force, that is carried within the mind stream. It is not a bunch of seeds that are surrounding you. The more technically correct way, cloud of seeds is a metaphorical way of describing it, but actually it's a causal potentiality. These seeds of kama are not static entities, but they're the momentum and composition of the mental current itself. So it's what they go with the flow. They're part of the flow of the mind So an intrinsically undesirable object provides the condition for an unwholesome resultant sense consciousness receiving and investigating to arise. So if there is a sense object that is intrinsically undesirable, then you'll get unwholesome resultant sense consciousness receiving, investigating. As an example, let's say that there is something sharp that you step on. This is a intrinsically undesirable object. It's a pain, and it causes unwholesome resultant sense consciousness receiving and investigating to arise. On the other hand, an intrinsically neutral or desirable object provides the condition for wholesome resultant sense consciousness receiving, investigating to arise. So the intrinsic nature of the object determines whether the cittas that arise, the vipaka cittas, the kamic resultant, are the result of some past wholesome kama or some past unwholesome kama. What more can we say about those kama creating cittas that are coming to result here? The only thing that we can say about them is that they had to come from a process in the kama vachara, or the sense sphere realm. It is not from a jhana. It had to be from a previous sense sphere process. Moving on to the 8 sense sphere resultants: life continuum, rebirth, linking, and death consciousness for human and devas with 2 or 3 roots. We've already talked about them. They're the result of the kama that pushed them into this life. For the fine material, 4 immaterial, that's the life continuum, rebirth, linking, death consciousness for brahmas of the jhana that brought them into that existence, that realm. The fruit cittas, phala, either 4 or 20, depending on whether you break them down by jhana level or not. They arise when saints experience nibbana immediately after path or later in the fruition attainment. Sometimes fruition attainment is called in the suttas the bliss of nibbana. So these are the things that cause These are the results. Karma-born matter. It is the sensitive part of the eye. The karma that brought me into this existence caused my eye sensitivity, like the eye part, they're called pasada. Rūpa is the Pali term. This is the sensitive part of the eye on the retina, the ear sensitive part of the ear, the eardrum, nose, tongue, and body. The heart base that supports all other consciousness, life faculty, and gender. These are the types of matter that are supported by by previous karma. Now, I want to make a point here that whether my boss likes me or not has nothing to do with karma. You take a look at the result, how karma works. It's all in terms of how the mind reacts when certain objects are presented to it, the 15 sense sphere rootless cittas, the life continuum cittas, fruit after experiencing nibbana, after the path, or the physical parts of my body. Those are the things that are the results of karma, not whether my boss likes me or not. Whether my boss likes me or not, that can be based on natural decisive support conditioning, habits. Perhaps you've interacted in the past life, or there are things in this life where some things about you trigger your boss to not like you. Why is this? Because many people, when talking about karma, kind of combine karma with the natural decisive support. One is a habit, the other is a life force. And why it's important to keep them separate is life force is somewhat fixed, if you will. Habits can be changed, can be adapted, can be understood in a different context. So how you approach changing it, how you approach addressing issues like your boss not liking you, if you say, oh, it's my karma, that may give you a fatalistic approach. Nothing I can do about it. It's my karma. Whereas if you see, habits, my boss's habits, the environment, all of those things could cause my boss not to like me. Those things, when you see it from that context, those are things that you can change. You can change your habits. You can respect and understand that, hey, some people, because maybe it was through some past experiences, it's not fatalistic. Okay. All right. Any questions on what I have done here before I start going into the next citta, the determining citta?
Brother Rob, I would think that if you say that my boss don't like me, would consist of both. Whether firstly is maybe it's my karma that I landed in this job. Secondly, is because of my habit, my habit, that's why my boss don't like me. Can I look at it in this way?
No. It is not
No.
if you look exactly at this karma stuff, where is it that you landed this job? That's not karma. There's no karma involved in what job you end up with. Because of your previous experience, it's all fully under natural decisive support condition. Because of previous conditioning, maybe you were trained as an accountant and you got an accountant job. So that previous training as an accountant is the condition for you getting an accountant job. It's not because of karma that you're an accountant. All right. Karma impacts where you're born, your health, your life. It doesn't influence, karma has nothing to do with what job you pick. What job you're in is because of natural decisive support, not just habits, but other conditions as well. I gave so many examples of conditions, positive and negative, that can influence the current state of mind. So why did you choose to become an accountant? Nothing to do with karma. It is because of habits, maybe even accumulated over previous existences, Maybe somebody you knew, a parent, your parent was an accountant, so you said, "Oh, I want to become an accountant," as an example. So it's not because of karma. Karma is about your life, not about your habits or other conditioning factors. Does that help?
Hi, Brother Rob. I like
Yes.
to think of the brother's questions not from the angle of the job, but
Okay.
from the angle of his boss, right?
Yep.
So I think, if I'm not right, I think the brother who asked this question, if I'm not wrong, he's saying, why am I assigned to this boss, right? And this boss every day will hack me, make my life difficult, want to get rid of me. So is that, brother, is that your question, that that's karma relating to his suffering because of the stress, pressure that he get from the boss? First question. Second question is, I like to think that the karma is both way. And this is a question, Brother Rob, because the fact that you are assigned to that boss is also your karma, right? That you're assigned to him, and also his karma that is assigned to you. Yeah, Brother Rob, is that the right thinking? Yeah, back to you, Brother Rob, and the other brother who asked the
Oh,
question.
okay.
Brother Rob,
Yep.
how do you look at those people who are trained to be a soldier who needs to go to war to kill people?
Okay. Okay. We got a couple of questions here. First of all, if you take a look at what's on the screen here, comma, there's nothing about your boss, nothing about your career, and your boss has the same type of karma conditions working. So, because of karma, your boss was born in a certain country, into a certain family, um, with a level of health. Those things that he got at the very beginning that came with his existence came from his karma. Which job he picked and the fact that he got to be promoted to be boss, all of that is not because of karma. It's all because of natural decisive support. And so, and the reason I'm stressing this differentiation is that when people say karma, there is this tendency to react as there's nothing that can be done. It's just my karma. It's a code word for fatalism. No choice law. Have to because of karma. Actually, karma has nothing to do with it. It's karma has once you are born in this existence, karma is not going to change. The life continuum, it's all the habits, the tendencies, the accumulations that influence your decisions going forward. In the determining citta, where we go next, that's it steers you. That citta steers you to a certain reaction, whether a reaction with wise attention, a wholesome reaction, or a reaction with unwise attention, ayuniso manasikara, to give you an unwholesome thing. That steering is done by the determining citta, which is not the result of karma. It doesn't create new karma. It is independent of karma, but it is influenced heavily by natural decisive support condition. So the decisions that you make through your whole life are not based on karma. The decisions that you make through your whole life are based on natural decisive support, which means things like habits, previous experiences, all of those things influence, not your karma. Don't treat it as fatalism. So, getting back to your the boss's quote karma, nothing to do with the situation. The boss's natural decisive support conditioning works just the way your natural decisive support conditioning works, but with different conditions, different origining factors. So perhaps in a previous life, there was you knew your boss, and there was friction between the two of you. Perhaps each of you have a different orientation, say religious orientation or moral orientation. I mean, you may be a very moral person, your boss may be less moral. That is because of natural decisive support condition, and the conflict between that arises naturally because of that decisive support condition. So don't treat it as fatalism. The choice of the soldier to become that, to take that career, was not because of karma. It was because of decisions that that soldier made throughout their lives. All those decisions were influenced not by karma, but by natural decisive support. And once he becomes a soldier, his actions as a soldier are then determined. I mean, he's also responsible for them as well. Okay, so I am trying to take away some of the fatalism that is normally associated with karma. When people say it's my karma, it's fatalistic. It's often fatalistic, and I want to avoid fatalism. I want to really focus on seeing all those conditions as habits, accumulations, influences, and including influences from previous lives. So hopefully we can shift our focus to, all right, maybe I knew this person in a previous life, or maybe it's decisions that I made or that he made that caused the, or maybe it is a philosophical belief, an underlying philosophical belief, morality or lack of morality, different influence has influenced them to think in different ways. So one person thinks one way, another person thinks a different way. That's not because of karma. That's because of natural decisive support condition acting out in that person's life stream. So really, I hope the useful thing that we can take away from this conversation is don't be fatalistic about it. It doesn't necessarily mean that the conflict with your boss becomes any easier, but don't just say, oh, it's my fate. It's natural that it would happen. It could be natural that it happened because naturally two different moral codes are conflicting, but it's not because of karma. Don't say it's predetermined or there's nothing that can be done about it. Look at your accumulations, how you can change, and how and maybe even how they can change. It was funny. I was listening to a talk on many years ago. I was listening to a talk on metta meditation by a monk at Brickfields, and at the end there was a Q&A session, and a lady asked a question. She said, I've got a bad relationship with this coworker, so I've been radiating metta to them. I've been radiating so much metta for so long, they haven't changed. And the monk said, no, 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 no. Metta doesn't make them change. It makes you change. That's the purpose of metta. And how does metta make you change? Through natural decisive support condition. It provides different conditioning in your mind to treat the reality of a imperfect world differently. And so there was that quote that I've shared a few times, that the world is I cannot cover the whole world with leather, but just leather on the soles of my feet is enough. And the analysis, or sorry, the implications is, hey, you're walking along and there are stones, there's painful objects on the path. Every time you step on those painful objects, there's going to be pain. You can wish that the whole world could be covered over. You can't do that. What you can do is you put leather on your own sandals, and in other words, focus on your mind's reaction to what is presented to it. And if you focus on your mind's reaction to what is presented to it, it's like putting on shoes when walking outside. Your feet don't suffer from all the sharp objects. Doesn't take away the sharp objects, they're still there, but the mind doesn't suffer from them. So you train, how do you put shoes on your feet? You train the mind through metta meditation, through compassion, through mindfulness, you equanimity. You train the mind through how to react to unpleasant objects in a more wholesome way. And as you train your own mind, because that mind is under your control, the rocks on the ground are not under your control. Your own mind is under your control. Your feet are under your control. Putting shoes on your feet, you don't experience the pain from stepping on all those sharp objects. So rather than saying, okay, my boss has got a problem with me, I'm going to have I'm having conflict with my boss. Look at, don't be fatalistic and say, oh, it's my karma or it's his karma. No, karma has nothing to do with it. Say, all right, what is under my control is my own training. What training can I add? Whether it is metta, equanimity, compassion, patience, what training can I practice to put soul shoes on my feet so that as I go through these landmine of sharp objects, I don't experience pain? Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, yes. Yes.
Yeah, Brother Rob, thanks.
Hey, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy, especially when you have to deal with it day in, day out. Not saying it's easy, but hoping that they will change hope is not really a strategy. This gives you a real strategy of what you can do in your own life to, train your mind. Imagine, how would the Buddha deal with it? Or how would an Arahat deal with that situation? Just imagine. And they wouldn't get angry. They wouldn't be, reactive. So use that as a role model, saying, I want to be like a Buddha or an Arahat when I go into work. I'm going to try to be an Arahat today when I'm dealing, and that doesn't change your boss's comments, but what it does do is it influences how you react to them.
Brother Rob, I go one question. Can you hear me, Brother Rob?
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays, right, in these modern societies, right, there's at least, especially the inferior, it can be the son or it can be the daughter-in-law treatment to the father-in-law. Yeah. So that, let's say, for example, we have one situation, right? The daughter-in-law is inferior to the mother-in-law. Yeah, they're not filial. And normally there's a Chinese saying that if the daughter-in-law is inferior to the mother-in-law, next time their children will be inferior to them. Is this due to karma or is it due to habit? Because their children see how the mother treat the so-called their parent-in-laws, right? Is it due to habit when they see this habit of this treatment? Then next time there's tendency that they actually do not treat their parent, or is it due to karma because they actually you treat?
It's not due to karma, it's due to habit. That's another very good example. So for example, the younger generation are brought up in a different environment than our generation. Our kids' generation brought up in a different environment than ours. And our daughter-in-law or son-in-law was brought up not only in a different environment, but in a completely different household, and maybe even in a different culture, right? So there's going to be obvious differences between that. And the grandchildren are going to observe and process and learn. This is accumulation, this is learning. And so calling it a habit is perhaps too specific. Call it an accumulation. They will, everyone accumulates from their environment, and especially young kids. My grandkids are accumulating from their parents and from their grandparents, particularly from their parents, modeling and understanding of the world. So it's nothing to do with karma. It has to do with decisive support. Why is it that there are stories in the commentary how one person, two ladies in one life, they were born as one animal. One animal ate the babies of the other. In the next life, the roles were reversed, back and forth, back and forth. This is not karma. This is natural decisive support conditioning operating. They were born as animals because of their karma, but the relationship between them came about because of natural decisive support conditioning. You may have been married to the same person for many existences, and so when you saw them in this life, love at first sight. It's not your first sight, probably. It was a condition from not habit, but accumulated from previous existence. Okay. So this doesn't, again, don't, the intergenerational or conflict with in-laws, don't put it down to karma, because when you put it down to karma, it tends to be fatalistic. I'm not saying that there isn't any of this conflict, but recognizing that there is this conflict and saying, what can I do? What's under my control to address this? And look at things like metta, karuna, equanimity, compassion. Karuna, compassion. So look at that way of doing it. Looking at those things, what you can do under your control is more productive than just saying, oh, it's karma. Does that help?
Okay, thank you, Brother Rob. Brother Elvis is not around.
Okay, somebody else asking a question? I'm sorry, did I hear something else? Okay, well, I don't think I have time to go into the determining citta, but we'll do that in our next class. So if somebody could read the reflections.
Reflection. Let us recall to our mind this morning, we come to the temple with the sole purpose to study the Dhamma. With good faith, citta, and the wise attention, sati, we learn and understand some of the Lord Buddha's teaching. Whenever there is any doubt or wrong understanding of the teaching, we seek to clear our doubts and straighten our views. With a proper understanding of the Dhamma, we can now put it into practice. The right understanding of the Dhamma will produce right thoughts that, in turn, give rise to right action, right speech, and right livelihood. With such a right frame of mind, we can face the realities of life. May the merits punya we gain through listening to the Dhamma, discussing on the Dhamma, and straightening our views help us in overcoming any difficulties we may face. May all beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty powers, rejoice in these merits we have acquired, and may they long protect the Buddha Sasana. May this merit be a contributing cause for the realization of Nibbana. Idang me punam Nibbana sa pacayo hotu. Sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And we say sadhu to our teachers, Brother Quay and Brother Rob. Sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you.